Very special word of welcome to everybody at all of our campuses today. I'm really honored to be with you. Greetings to everybody in Kernersville, blessings, my church family in Clemens, and to all the beloved in King, and a special greeting to everyone who's joining us online. Are you ready for some good news? The truth will set you free. There are all kinds of lies that can bind us and put us into anxiety, but Jesus said the truth will set you free. It means that your liberation, your freedom from fear could be as close as your next thought. We've been learning all about the untroubled heart, the offer that Jesus has given for His own heart to be our heart, His own peace to be our peace. That's what we're learning about. If we were to stand up and begin sharing about all of our fears, which we won't ever do, we might do it in small groups or with a good friend, but if we were to stand up and start sharing our fears, I'm sure that some of our fears would seem quite silly to other people. Things that had really plagued us might make no sense to someone else. And I've decided that I think for the first time publicly, I want to share the silliest fear that I ever had. It is a fear that now seems preposterous to me, but was besetting to me for a number of years, casting a forecast of gloom in my future and making me feel worried about the future. And I harbored it quietly for a long time. Are you ready? Here it is. When I was a child, I was afraid that because of overpopulation, there wouldn't be anywhere for me to live when I grew up. I did. I thought that because the crisis of overpopulation was going to be so great, based on some things I'd heard, that there wouldn't be even a small little place of land, a little place of any type where I could live or raise a family or play kick the can or just have a place to rest my head. I actually believed that when I was a child. I don't know if it started in first grade or something that I heard some teacher say, or maybe we saw a film about the coming crisis of overpopulation. I had to this week, while I was thinking about admitting this silly fear, I had to go back and go, where did that come from? And I realized that about the time that I was going to first grade, Paul Ehrlich wrote a book called The Population Bomb. It warned of this catastrophic consequence in population growth. It was a worldwide bestseller, over 3 million copies, printed in multiple languages, and was largely considered to be authoritative about the coming overpopulation crisis. In that book, he said, I quote, "The battle to feed all of humanity is over. In the 1970s and 1980s, hundreds of millions of people will starve to death in spite of any crash programs embarked upon now." He also said, "A cancer is an uncontrolled growth of cells. The population explosion is an uncontrolled growth of people. In both cases, the end result is death." And I guess my first and second and third grade teachers, they read it and they got into it, and somehow that's what was taught. And that was my big fear as a child, was that there wasn't going to be anywhere that I could even live in the future. And I don't have that fear anymore because of one simple reason, right? It wasn't true. The simplest level of fear, a worry that plagued me when I was a little boy, was as easy to get rid of as is just a revelation of a little bit of truth. What if that's the way all our fears work? Is that underneath fear, somewhere, is a wrong thought, a bad idea, something that's false, a lie that's fueling the anxiety. As we've been proceeding along in the Untroubled Heart, I want to, every step of the way, be as practical as I can with you. And I think sometimes it's appropriate to have a sermon like this, which is not so much an exposition line by line or paragraph by paragraph of a text, as it is reflections on a central text. And this text, Jesus said to the Jews, John 8:31, who had believed him, "If you abide in my word, you're truly my disciples, and you'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free." I want to talk about really practical way, 5 levels that I've observed in pastoral ministry and in my own life of ways that we try to deal with fear, all of them inadequate and insufficient except for ultimately what Jesus has said, the truth will set you free. 5 levels are the ways we try to face fear that ultimately in the end I want to celebrate with you and invite you in a very practical way into the deepest gospel manner of healing all of our fears. The first level of hiding our fears is what I would say is hiding our fears. It is an attempt to pretend that the fear is not there, to not even acknowledge the anxiety. Brene Brown has said, we can choose courage or we can choose comfort, but we can't have both, not at the same time. And it's very true. There's something that takes real courage about even just owning up to anxiety that we're experiencing. Maybe some of you remember Scott Peck's famous book, The Road Less Traveled, where he began with the words, "Life is difficult." And he went on to say that it is in our attempts, directly or indirectly, to avoid facing the problems of life. Instead, we try to go around them or not even acknowledge them. That's where most of our mental problems come from. He said this, most mental illness is some form of an attempt to avoid legitimate suffering. So there is a great temptation to try to, in my words, hide our fears, to pretend that they're not there, to not acknowledge at all. And this is the lowest level of trying to deal with the anxieties in our lives, by shifting it or pretending it's not there in some way. And I think a lot of ways that we shift this anxiety so that we think we're not feeling it. And in the first, I might call it, "You're my problem." And that's where we're actually anxious, but instead we center our complaint towards someone else. It's a way of letting our anxiety be shifted towards another. The people of God got set free through the miracles of God, through the mediator Moses, and they got out into the wilderness, and before long they were feeling hungry, and instead of acknowledging that they were anxious and bringing their anxiety to God, instead they turned on Moses and said, "The problem is you. It was a bad plan. We never should have done it. Oh, to go back to Egypt." Why did the Pharisees persecute Jesus so much? Because they were afraid of losing their own power. So a lot of the times when we are trying to point the finger at someone else, it's actually because we're suffering with some anxiety that we haven't acknowledged. Or sometimes, I'd put it this way, we're trying to hide our anxiety by saying, "I'm not afraid, I'm just angry. And I need to be angry about this." You know, it's sort of like I was thinking about imagine a mother of a teenager who wants nothing but the best for her teenage daughter, and her teenage daughter's getting ready to go out to some party or something. She comes down from her bedroom and she's dressed inappropriately, and the mother gets really angry about it, and you go change your clothes, which perhaps they needed to discuss the clothing, But really what might be going on perhaps is a mother who is afraid, maybe afraid that this child, this teenager, would recapitulate the sexual transgressions in the mother's own life as a young person. Who knows? The correction might need to be made, but until we acknowledge our anxiety about a situation, we tend to displace it. Or maybe we can say, "I'm not afraid, I'm better than others." This is what's really at the root of prejudice and racism. So the Ku Klux Klan, which is like with all the hate spewing towards other races, It's not really so much a hate issue as is a fear issue. I'm afraid of losing control, afraid of being inferior, afraid of losing my place in the world. Or we might be like, I'm not afraid. I'm beyond all that emotional stuff. And, I worry about it if I see someone who can't ever admit their anxiety or ever shed a tear or ever be in touch with any of that, because sometimes we could celebrate that, especially amongst us men. We want to be calloused and tough and exterior, never show an emotion, as if that is what's making us strong. But oftentimes it's not at all. It's just a heart that's grown callous, and it's a way of hiding anxiety, maybe even hiding the deepest kinds of fears that are in there in a tough exterior. Or we can try to hide it by like, I'm not afraid, I'm just trying to get people in line. And we can really ramp up our controlling behaviors. Pay a lot of attention when you're ramping up your desire to control everything and everybody, because usually it is a result of some anxiety that's in us. The nagging wife usually isn't a mean person. She's more afraid maybe of being unloved or being left without anyone caring for her. Archibald Hart, a Christian psychologist, wrote a book called The Anxiety Cure. It's a pretty old book now, but I highly recommend it. He talked about the importance about acknowledging what it is that we're feeling. And I like what he says when he's discussing panic attacks. He says, don't fight your feelings of panic. Instead, just work at resisting them. But there's a difference, he says, between the two. Fighting your panic systems is likely to make them worse. It increases the fight or flight response that's responsible for the anxiety in the first place. You're helping to feed the enemy. So there's a way in which acknowledging, okay, I'm feeling anxious, this is what this is. And the more that I'm saying, more that you can be in touch with that and not try to push it to the side or push it down, the more likely it won't squirt out in an unproductive way. Again, Brené Brown, she says, when we deny our stories and disengage from tough emotions, they don't go away. Instead, they own us. They define us. Our job is not to deny the story, but to defy the ending, to rise strong, recognize our story, and rumble with the truth until we get to a place where we think, yes, this is what happened, but I will choose how the story ends. I love that. Okay, so level one, which is like the lowest level that I've seen of people trying to deal with their fear, is to hide it and to keep this alliteration going. The second level, I would call it hushing our fears. If you go down to the beach and order a calabash shrimp platter, it's going to come with some hush puppies. And most people think that the word hush puppies, it came from sailors and others who would have dogs that would be yapping, and they'd fry a little bit of the cornmeal and toss some little tidbits so the dogs would be quiet and not make noise or not mess up what's going on in their gathering. Hush puppies, like, let me just take this little bit of something here and give it to you. You eat that, and it'll make you hush. And I think the second level of dealing with fear is kind of like that. It's like, I'm just going to try to make this thing hush. And sometimes it's like we acknowledge, I feel uneasy, but we just take the lowest level way of dealing with it, and that is with some substance or some activity that we think will mask that feeling, so it won't feel it anymore. And I don't know what your choice might be. It can be alcohol. It could be some unhealthy activity. But I don't know. Me, Ben and Jerry's might be it. I don't know. I mean, it does make you feel better for a little while. The problem is that after, you could eat a whole pint, but you'll feel good for a little bit, and then your anxiety is still there, right? I mean, this is the problem with substance abuse in general, of course. The problem is that something that might affect your brain chemistry for the short term, then very often, like so many drugs, can become addictive. And the problem with addiction is not necessarily that the activity or even the glass of wine that you enjoy or the occasional ice cream sundae that you enjoy, that in and of itself it was wrong. But when you're using it, you see, as a hush puppy, right? I've had some anxiety and I wanted to hush. And the reason addictions are hard to break is because there becomes a physiological dependency and a habit is formed. Your mind, your soul, and your body thinks this is normal, but what the real problem, the reason it's hard to break addiction, is because the anxiety that started it is still there. Level 3, okay? First, lowest level is let's just hide it. Let's don't even acknowledge it. Second, let's hush it, hush puppy. And level 3, I would say, is handling our fears. Now we're getting to where we're getting a little productive here. And we do want to be able to handle and to cope and manage. And I advise, if you struggle with anxiety, learning good coping mechanisms. All truth is God's truth. And so if there are ways that we've learned through exercise and good breathing exercises, all that can help us, then we should pay attention to that. And if you can manage your fears, it's less likely your fears are managing you, and you can function. You can learn at this level to compensate for weaknesses, but it's not the ultimate level. I mean, if you said, "Hey, Pastor, can you see very well?" I'd say, "Well, it depends on what we're talking about. Are you talking about with contact lenses in or glasses on? Or are you talking about with no prescription? If you're talking about with no glasses, no contact lenses, no, I can't see very well. But if I have some prescription lenses, then I can see 20/20. And I'm very happy to manage my sight. I would love for God just to heal it, and I didn't have to wear them. It was so interesting. I was talking to my brother, who's a couple years older than me. He wore glasses all his work life, and he retired about 5 years ago, and his eyes have corrected to where he doesn't need glasses anymore. I said, well, hallelujah, you know. But I wear corrective lenses, and so I see well with them. I manage quite fine. I think sometimes that's a place. I mean, that's a better place than the first two levels of dealing with fears. We're handling it. We've learned to cope with it. We've learned how, but I don't think it's the ultimate level. I advise all the things that we can do that could help us. Partly, I think learning prayerful, meditative prayer with proper breathing can be a great way to help handle our anxieties. A fairly recent book, Breath as Prayer, could really help you with this. Breathing in slowly 4 seconds and saying, the Lord is my shepherd. Hold your breath 4 seconds. Breathe out really slowly. I shall not want. Breathe in deeply through your nose and out through your... The adage is like smelling the flowers, blowing out the candles. Well, that can be a very helpful thing. It actually impacts vagus nerve and can impact your brain, help your brain think about, hey, we shouldn't be panicking right now. So handling our fears, that's the third level. The fourth level is a little bit hard to describe, but I've seen this actually in my own life. And I've seen it in many, many people. I would call it harnessing our fears. And by this, I mean that this is where we either consciously or unconsciously take hold of the fear, and we now are using it as if we have captured a wild stallion, put a bit in its mouth, and taken mastery over the animal and are using its energy to get us somewhere. I think sometimes we do that. We do that with our own adrenaline. We do that with our own fear, so to speak. And until I got a lot of healing, I didn't realize this had happened maybe in some areas of my life. And one that I would share, just to be transparent with you, is that I used to have a much greater worry, a greater fear of failing, of not being super successful. I realized, like, as a child, as a student, I really got into a thing. It was like I just felt like I had to make A's all the time, and it's a kind of a complicated thing that gets your soul into that sort of perfectionistic tendency. But it had to do with being a symptom of shame in my life, and I had a kind of fear that was like, I need to be super successful all the time at everything. And it's a very anxious way to live. But if you're afraid of making a C on a test, there's a way in which that fear of coming up short will fuel you to study like crazy for the test. And I'm just using this by way of example, like taking tests, but it applied to a lot of areas of my life where that fuel would help me stay up half the night to study for the test so that I would make the A. And to an extent, you see, it worked. But that fear of failing, that in a sense was fueling the success, was also tearing me up on the inside. And you can't, in the end, live like this because it's physically destructive, it's hurtful to relationships, and it's not the way that God designed us to live. So the great danger of trying to harness fear is that you're using it to try to move you to do something that God actually wants you to do for joy and faith. So this is my observation. I'm thinking about this verse, the truth will set you free. And all of those levels, the level of hiding our fear or hush fear or trying to just handle it or to even harness it so that it becomes part of that adrenaline rush in your life that gets you moving. All of those, as you can see, are something that fall well short of what Jesus says actually sets us free. He says, the truth will set you free. And this is where now we get to the deepest way of dealing with fear, and this is the healing of fear. This is where we're not covering it with a Band-Aid. This is where we're not misusing it or displacing it. We're actually going to have it be healed. And it can be that fears can be healed. And this is really what God wants for us. I think that's what He's addressing. He's talking about getting to the root of it. Back to my silliest fear ever, I was afraid of overpopulation of the world and I won't have a place to lay my head. Well, that's not a fear that I've just learned to handle. That fear's gone because it got replaced with truth. And this is how fear, I think, is healed. It's when a false idea gets replaced with the truth and it actually becomes part of us and we live it and we feel it. John Mark Comer has written a book called Live No Lies. And I like that title because what he's saying is that the problem is not just that we give a nod of assent to an idea, it becomes part of us, like we are living it. Isn't that the way it goes with our ideas and our ideologies? Paul says in Romans 10, verse 17, that there is a way we can understand how faith comes. He says, faith comes from hearing, and hearing through the word of Christ. So what's the word of Christ? Well, Jesus said of Himself, John 14:6, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. So Jesus has said of Himself that He's the truth. He called Himself light that displaces darkness. That's an image of truth displacing lies. And so to say faith comes by hearing, hearing through the word of Christ, is to say faith has a process by which it's born. Faith comes through the hearing and taking into our being truth, the word of Christ. And fear is a perversion of faith. It's not that fear is exactly opposite of faith in every way. Fear is like an inversion or a perversion of faith because they have this in common. Faith and fear are both expressions of deep-seated belief about something. Both fear and faith have a belief about what the future holds. Fear and faith have that in common. And they have this in common that they both are an expression that leads towards the thing believed. We're in March Madness, and there will be a lot of moments where there's somebody who's on the free throw line with the last second. If they can make the free throw, they win the game. And if that ball player is full of faith and thinking, I'm going to make this, I've made a million of these and we're going to win the game, and he's relaxed and he's full of faith, he's more likely to make it, right? But if he has to sit there and think about it and what it would be like to be the dog that blows the game by not getting it, he gets nervous and he can easily miss a free throw that he would normally make. Fear and faith are like that. They lead us towards the very thing that is envisioned. And so if faith is born through an encounter with the truth of Jesus Christ that we experience and it becomes a part of us, and fear is the perversion of faith, or an inversion of it at least, then if faith comes by hearing, hearing by the word of Christ, we could also say that fear comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of that which is not Christ or antichrist. That we could say that faith comes by the embracing of truth, but fear comes through the embracing of that which is false. That faith, therefore, comes from God who is truth, and fear is generated from that which is antichrist, which is anti-gospel, which is anti-truth. And the problem is that so often we have things we're believing, and we believe it because we think it's true. We don't believe lies because we know they're lies and we want to believe them. Once you know it's not true, you don't believe it anymore. And so there is freedom that comes when the truth, when revelation of the truth becomes real to us. Healing of fear is a matter of truth that is displacing lies. This is why the gospel is so powerful and so important, and it's why I've devoted my life to helping you and anybody that I possibly could to understand, relish, savor, and swim in the depths of the good news of what God's done for us in Jesus Christ. A gospel that tells us that sin is our real problem, and that it caused a giant gulf of separation between us and God, one that we could never overcome. And that God, who is so perfectly loving, was not content to let us perish, but instead He came in the person of Christ to be a perfect and sinless human being so He could represent us. And He took our place on the cross, wherein God could be both just and justifier. He could still be a God who's just and doesn't let sin go unpunished, but He could be the justifier that's the very heart of God, the mercy giver, the one who loves you infinitely. He died in your place. And Jesus Christ rose from the dead, proclaiming a victory over evil and over sin and over death, and inviting anyone at all, no matter how terrible their past or great their sin or how confused they are, to simply accept what He's done for them, and in so doing, to be regenerated, to be born anew, and to become His. And you belong to God. And that deep assurance of being accepted in the beloved is at the essence, the heart of everything that's gospel. So we just live in that and swim in that rather than the lies that the culture tells us. And this, I think, is what Paul meant when he talked about tearing down strongholds in 2 Corinthians 10. Though we walk in the flesh, we're not waging war according to the flesh. We're not simply trying to push away our fears or handle these things with just worldly means. But there's something greater at work. Verse 4, for the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but have divine power to destroy strongholds. We destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised up against the knowledge of God, and take every thought captive to Christ. The truth sets us free. Truth comes from hearing the word of Christ because He is the way and the truth and the life. So, the deepest way, the most gospel way, God's way of dealing with our fears, to heal it by having a revelation of what is false and a revelation of what's true, and then we can begin to walk that out. So here's a practical suggestion for dealing with our anxiety, whether it be great or whether it be small, and we all are dealing with anxiety. First, acknowledge it. This is what I'm feeling. This is anxiety. I don't need to try to displace it towards someone else. I don't need to try to cover it up with anger or unpleasantness. There's no way to deny it. I need to acknowledge that's what I'm feeling right now. It's here. And we don't try to just hush it by taking a substance or thinking that some form of temporary pleasure or fleshly pleasure is going to make it go away. But instead, we begin to say, well, I would like to learn all that I can about how I can cope with this, knowing that that really is what it is. I'm going to learn how to handle it, but I'm on a journey here. And we recognize where anytime that we've sort of harnessed that anxiety to become a kind of addiction to our own adrenaline that keeps us going, and we say that there's a deeper way, and what we learn to do is we discover what is the lie that's fueling the fear. Look again, John chapter 8. If the Son sets you free, you'll be free indeed. Jesus said, I know, he's talking to the Pharisees, you're offspring of Abraham, yet you seek to kill me because my words find no place in you. You're not living them out, you see. I speak of what I've seen with my Father. You do what you've heard from your Father. And this gets really harsh here, but at verse 43, Jesus says, why do you not understand what I say? It's because you cannot bear to hear the word. You are of your father, the devil, and your will is to do your father's desires. He was a murderer from the beginning, does not stand in the truth, because there's no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks out of his own character, for he's a liar and the father of lies. But I tell you the truth. You see, this seems harsh, it seems strong, but the reason that he's being so blunt about this is because there's so much at stake. And this is why we need the gospel, and this is why we need each other, and we need to live in it and live in its truth. And when we're together as the people of God, let's remind each other of the goodness of God and what he's done for us, and remind each other of who we really are in Christ. So love leads into truth, which builds faith. God is love. He builds truth, which builds faith. And Satan is hate with lies that builds fear. So the truth is what sets you free. You know, it's so interesting. My silly. I really thought there's going to be nowhere for me to lay my head or raise a family. You know. But I began to experience some cognitive dissonance about this as I got a little older. And you know where it first registered with me? This is so funny. It was like I'd never talked to my parents or anybody about this fear that I had. I just assumed everybody else had the fear, you know. But we're riding to the beach one summer. And back in the day, it seemed like it took forever to get to the beach. Now we zip down there in 3.5 hours, but then it just took forever to get down to the beach. And we're on the road, those rural eastern North Carolina roads, somewhere between Roland and Fair Bluff, you know. And there's just nothing but woods and forests and farmlands, just every now and then a little house. And I remember getting a little bit older and looking at it and going, well, maybe I could build a house there. There seems to be plenty of land there. And this is where it started for me. And sometimes this is the way truth comes. It starts sneaking in on you like a sun cracking through the clouds. There are other times where the truth just comes in like a flood, and you realize that everything you believe was wrong, and it just changes all that. But underneath, I think every fear, down deep, there's a lie from the pit of hell. And if you can discover it and you can own up to it, this is what transformation looks like. You replace it with the truth of the gospel. Jesus is light and he always dispels darkness. Jesus is truth, and the truth will set you free. And that's the gospel.